Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Ben Pring, who co-founded and leads the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant, an American multinational technology company that provides consulting, information technology, and outsourcing services. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
Great, Adrian. Nice to be with you.
You're very welcome. Now, Ben, for my benefit and also for the people that are going to listen in, can you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and your background and also about the work that you currently now do?
Yes, of course. I lead a group, as you mentioned in your introduction, called the Center for the Future of Work at Cognizant. Cognizant, as you said, is a big technology consulting and services company, sort of $20 billion worth of revenue, 300,000 people around the world. My group, which is sort of the thought leadership arm of the company, is a relatively small group, but we're all typically ex-industry analysts, IT analysts. I spent a lot of time at Gartner, many years at Gartner. Some of the other guys are from Gartner, Forrester, the big analyst shops. And we sort of operate in a way as a sort of independent, forward-looking think tank within the company, looking at leading edge tech, looking at changes in business dynamics, economic dynamics, and trying to give our clients, our prospects, people we interact with, a sense, a point of view of where the world is going, where tech's going, and how they can, leverage the upside and minimize the downside of that. So we produce books, white papers, all the sort of traditional things you'd think of, and videos and documentaries, and spend a lot of time talking at events. And so it's a sort of exciting role. And I've been in tech all my life, 15 years in Gartner, and prior to that in Coopers and Lybrand, some other consulting companies, always sort of in the tech/business world. So I've really sort of lived my whole life on that intersection of leading edge tech and trying to think about the future of everybody's work.
Perfect. Now, you mentioned books, and that's actually why we're here today, to talk about a new book that you recently co-authored with Paul Roehrig, which is called Monster. Now, Monster in big capital letters, that is. A tough love letter to the machines that rule our lives, our jobs, our lives, and future. Now, before we get into it, give me a little bit of a background about it and what its main thesis is, and also kind of who it's for. Because it's quite colourful. I really like some of the graphics in it. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, well, on this journey of many years, and in the last 10 years in Cognizant, really sort of thinking about and observing and writing and advising on many of the leading edge technologies that now are sort of increasingly familiar to people, particularly things like AI, machine learning, data analytics, personalization, all of the sort of algorithms running all of that. There's a good news story in all of that. There's a lot of competitive advantage for businesses, for individuals, for societies, for countries to be generated from that. And we spend a lot of time helping people think about that. At the same time, I think it's undeniably true that there is a downside to some of these aspects.
Uh-huh.
And as we were out on our travels talking about our last book, which was published in 2017, called What to Do When Machines Do Everything, which was really about the rise of AI, it became very obvious to us at events, talking to senior people in boardrooms, that sense that this was a very, very, double-edged sword was very widely shared. And people kind of got the idea that there was a lot of upside in this, but increasingly were conscious and anxious about that downside. And so rather than sort of running away from that, which I think a lot of people might have thought was the wise thing to do, we sort of steered into that and said, well, yeah, let's look at this. Let's kind of study this and let's acknowledge what's going on. Let's acknowledge the downside of social media, the impact it's having on our kids, the impact it's having on democracy writ large, disinformation, fake news, things like that. Let's look at the downside of automation, the impact on human employment. Let's think about issues around bias in algorithms. Let's think about the role of cyber in geopolitics, in security and defense. And as I say, we wanted to try and stare at this problem. And really the thesis and the argument of the book, Adrian, is that if you buy the simple analogy that we've spent the last 25 years laying the tar macadam for Al Gore's information superhighway,
yeah.
aka the internet. In 2021, we've got this incredibly, amazing road that we're all going down 100 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, 300 miles an hour, but we don't have any red lights.
Right.
We don't have any traffic lights or any roundabouts or any stop signs or yield signs for my American audience.
Sure.
And so it's time for us, people who love technology, who believe in its power and its promise to create a better world. It's time for us to acknowledge that we need to put in place the rules of the road, if you like, for the next 25 years of the information superhighway. And so by kind of acknowledging there are challenges and there are issues, but not running away from them, I think it behooves people like us, people in tech who have a vested interest in keeping tech in a good place, hashtag tech for good, to offer thoughts, recommendations, advice, guidance, act as a rallying point, act as a signal for other fellow travelers to let's all kind of roll up our sleeves and let's think about the things that we should be doing. Mm-hmm. So the promise of the technology that we're all interested in can fulfill itself, and we don't end up in the sort of dystopian world that a lot of people fear. You may have seen in the last couple of days, Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, saying that the only thing Orwell got wrong was the timing. It's not going to be 1984; it's going to be 2024.
Right.
That's a world we don't want to happen. Personally, Paul, my group, the Center for the Future Work, Cognizant collectively, none of us want that to happen, but we've got to figure out how to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's why it's a tough love letter to the tech that's ruling our lives, jobs, and future.
And is that not kind of as a technologist? I mean, forgive me, but as a technologist, and also the fact that you spend a lot of time sort of speaking to people that want to buy technology or that are developing technology, that's sort of, is it not slightly heretical?
It is, yes. I'm nervous. Any moment I'm going to get burnt at the stake for saying all of this. No, that's very true. And we've thought long and hard about that, and we've been very pleased with the reaction the book's had in the last couple of months while it's been out, because we feared we would kind of generate some of that reaction. Our thought and our argument again was, it behooved us as people who love technology to step forward to acknowledge the issues rather than run away from them. You will remember the movie, perhaps younger people won't, Adrian, The Graduate, the Dustin Hoffman movie,
Yes.
and that famous line, I've got one word for you, Benjamin: plastics. That
Yes.
was 1967. If you think about the plastic industry in that 67 through to the modern day, it's sort of gone from being the leading edge, the white heat of technology invention. That famous line was basically an older guy telling a younger guy, get into this industry, it's going to be a great industry. If you were kind of remaking that movie in the last 5 years, the line would be, I've got one word for you, Benjamin: algorithms.
Yes.
And that's the promise. But if you think about the issues we've got with plastics now in the world, and all the waste and all of the issues we've got around environmental sustainability. Again, the arc of the plastics industry has been a huge boom, but now it's sort of in the doghouse.
Maybe we can say here that lithium batteries is probably going to be the next thing in 25 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's right, and that's why the recolonization of Africa is such a big deal, the Congo, etc. But again, if you put technology into that same arc of the plastics industry, I don't want the technology industry to be in the doghouse in 20 years' time or 30 years' time. And there's a potential it could be, again, if we don't manage the downsides. I mean, another industry that's sort of gone through this is the alcohol industry. Think about all the beer advertising. When you see the Heineken ads on the Champions League games, it's always drink responsibly. The Guinness ads are all drink. So the industry is taking steps to make sure, of course, for their own vested interest, that we keep the drinks in that context in a good place. We also draw parallels in the book with the way that atomic energy is managed.
Right.
In the UK, the UK Atomic Energy Authority. That's a multidisciplinary, non-technology centric oversight board that again manages this technology developed by scientists, but it's not just left to the scientists alone. And again, I think there's lessons to be learned from a situation like that, where with obviously some high profile issues along the way, nuclear energy is managed in a pretty safe, responsible way. Again, that's the logic. We need to manage technology in a responsible way to keep it in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that, but you also say in the book, I mean, and this is probably related to kind of how technical, pardon the pun, technology kind of is, but we can't cede control of technology to technologists. And in fact, you go on to say that technology must instead be led by community. Is that the same sort of situation? And i.e., we need to not necessarily be led by what possibly, the possibilities, but actually kind of like what is the realities of the outcomes.
No, that's right. And again, if you think about the last 25 years, broadly call them the internet years if you want to. I mean, all of the technology that's emerged in this sort of internet, post-cloud, Web 2.0 era has all been like magic to ordinary people, to civilians, to business people. And there's been this whole cult of the technologist and the nerd, and I'll just let them get on with it. We don't know what they're doing, but it's obviously exciting and it's innovative and it's creating huge wealth. Just let them get on with it. And you can see the downsides of that anywhere you look in the world at the moment. That sort of libertarian, hands-off, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater mentality. There's some logic to it, and it's undeniable the commercial results of that. But you can see again in lots of different aspects that technologists left to themselves tend to create solutions, and certainly over time the sort of compounding of multiple different approaches. Again, you can see the deleterious effects of that, and I don't think any one of us, even if you're the most sort of techie nerdy person, wants to live in a world dominated by other techie nerdy people. I think that would be pretty awful, frankly.
Well, yes. I mean, and so, I mean, I don't know if the people that are at the heart of this could have ever envisaged some of the negative externalities that happen because of the data privacy, sort of the use of technology, its impact. If you throw in behavioral design and all those different things, and also the mores of people in general.
Yes.
And things are moving so fast. You talk about this idea that we can't also wait for governments to fix the problems, and the governments can't actually wait for individuals to fix it. So, I mean, I guess my question is like going, we're in a pickle, right? So what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah. No, we are. And I think, again, that's sort of where we are in 2021. There's a sort of sense of, well, the government will fix it. And then, people in policy have a sense, oh, well, people will sort of fix it with their own behaviors. So we're all standing around waiting for somebody else to fix it. Mm-hmm. And again, that's how we sort of organized the book, to have thoughts and recommendations at a policy level, a sort of political level, although the book is not partisan in any way, but at the same time to acknowledge the truth that we all have personal agency.
Yes.
And one expresses one's opinion at the ballot box, at the checkout counter, and with every like and swipe and comment you make online. So we have to, I think, be much more responsible individually in the way we interact with technology. And again, for the ordinary civilian, busy sort of regular Joe, just getting on with their life, they still, I mean, I think this is kind of strange to say in 2021, but they still don't really understand what's at stake here. They don't really understand what is being done with their data. They don't really understand what is happening by their seeding of any notion of privacy, of security, of agency in the way their data is being used. And I think, again, I think what we're trying to do is just, put out a rallying cry for more and more people to wake up and realize what is happening. I'm sure you know the Shoshana Zuboff book, Surveillance Capitalism.
Yes.
Which is a wonderful book, but it's a very, very difficult book to read, with all due respect.
It's the sort of book that you kind of dip in and dip out of, and then sometimes use to hold a door open.
That's right.
It's that size of book.
Again, I mean, on my travels, I talk about her a lot. I mean, I've spoken to her a few times, and I'm very, very full of admiration for her. And
I mean, don't get me wrong; it's an incredible piece of work.
Yes, no, it's an incredible piece of work. But my point is that very few people in business, in policy, in tech have read it. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult read. It's a bit like the Thomas Piketty book, Capital. It's very not an easy book to read. Our book is, in a way, like the simple, easy hour-and-a-half read version of that book. Not exclusively, we range on to some other areas as well. But my point is that that ordinary Joe who doesn't understand what's going on, hasn't paid attention, hasn't got really any interest in this, isn't going to read the Shoshana Zuboff book. They may stumble across our book, and as you say, because of the way we designed it, the imagery, the metaphors, the language we've used, it's a much more sort of easily digestible book, we hope. That's our design point, our intention. But it's important that people realize what's going on, because, again, in that context of that George, of that Microsoft quote earlier on, Brad Smith quote from earlier on from Microsoft, a lot of people are just sleepwalking into this world, and Orwell warned us about this world, and the vast majority of people are not heeding that warning. That's what scares us. That's what agitates and motivates us.
So we talk about governments and we talk about individuals, but then I guess the obvious thing that stands out there is that it sort of implies that something or some sort of form of collective organizations, let's say, have to step in and play a role. And because I think that's what I'm interested in. If I look at things, particularly from a customer and an employee and a stakeholder perspective, it feels to me that organizations have a big role to play in how they use this technology, but also how they use kind of data, both on all sides of the spectrum, as it were.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
No, absolutely. No, again, this is the notion of this, UK Atomic Energy Authority. It's multi-stakeholders.
Yeah.
It's technologists, it's business people, commercial people, it's political people, it's lay people, it's moral philosophers. It's going to take a village, and I think the same model is absolutely needed here. And again, we're not trying to shut anything down. We're not trying to say cancel social media or delete social media or anything. Again, we see the power of these technologies deployed and optimized in the right way to be incredibly positive. I mean, this whole notion of the fourth industrial revolution. We're not Luddites in any way here. We're trying to keep people safe with this technology. But so you're right. So it's going to be, I think, it's going to be a series of political actions, legislative actions. One of the things we call for, and this is sort of written in an American context, but it's because I'm based in the States, but it's I think applicable in any country around the world. We call for the creation of what we term the Federal Technology Administration, an FTA, which would sort of mirror the charter of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration,
right,
in America. And again, if people know the history of how the FDA was created 100 years ago through agitation by writers like Upton Sinclair in his famous book, The Jungle, all about the meat industry in Chicago, this sort of unregulated industry. And lots of people were getting sick from the meats, from the food, because there was no oversight, there was no regulations in the whole, farm to table kind of supply chain. Again, I think that's a metaphor we can deploy in the modern world, that we need a regulatory body, a policeman, a judge, call it what you will, to oversee this thing, which is so crucially important to us. And again, if you know the charters of the FTC and the FCC in America, both large regulatory bodies, they don't talk and don't pursue anything to do with what we're talking about now. Sure. They have no remit to audit algorithms. They have no remit to establish data portability. They have no remit to oversee any aspect of how data is leveraged in sort of personalization and customer employee experience, etc. So in essence, there's a game going on, which is the biggest game in town now, and there's no rules, there's no referees, there's no judges. This is kind of the crazy situation we're in at the moment. And that famous moment, when Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in front of Congress, when he was asked, what's your business model, by one of the elderly senators. Senator, we sell ads. That was a wake-up call, I think, for a lot of people. That moment when this person who was supposedly the umpire, the referee, the judge in this situation, literally didn't know the game that was being played, and I think we can't allow that situation to happen. So there's a sort of regulatory framework, but again, coming back to the point you sort of touched on, Adrian, that this is up to us as individuals to use tools that protect our data, that protect our privacy. And people are, I think, slowly, certainly people who are aware of the stakes to hand, are using things like Signal and DuckDuckGo because they are more focused on using platforms and solutions that do respect that. And of course, there's writ large is the sort of big battle that's now being fought between Apple and Facebook.
Yeah, I think Apple is an interesting kind of interesting example, because if I think about, you talked about regulatory authorities that sit in between governments and consumers, but I think there's also a role for organizations to play, the brands themselves to play, in terms of exercising agency on behalf of both their employees and their customers and their other stakeholders. And Apple is trying to play that out versus sort of doing very different things to what Facebook is. I mean, but I think and that's the sort of the domain that I'm really interested in. And in the book, you talk about these, you have this manifesto, these 8 declarations that you believe will make up a better world for better tech. And I just wanted to ask you, I don't want to go through all of them, because we'd be here for hours, because it's like a kind of reciting the Constitution of sorts. But I was thinking about, if you were to say to brands that are so thinking about this, that which of the declarations would you highlight? Say these are the ones that I think that you need to be paying most attention to, because they're the most important or most relevant for you and what you're doing and the relationship that you have with your customers and employees, so on and so forth.
Well, in a way, again, this is I think the ultimate sort of interesting irony in all of this story, where we're talking here about, very, very leading edge technology, developed in the last 10, 15 years, which is having this incredibly huge impact at incredibly accelerated speed on the world we live in. But yet, the most fundamental part of the manifesto, to your question, is in essence the oldest rule known to mankind, the oldest guidance known to mankind, the golden rule.
Right.
Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And I think that applies at an individual level. It applies at a business level, at a commercial level as well. And again, one of the ironies I often find in this discussion, and this, as you say, would be very kind of interesting to you and your audience, is how many people working in different aspects of technology, customer service, experience, et cetera, who are leveraging data from as many possible sources as they can to create personalized experiences, et cetera, have ad blockers on their own personal phones.
Well, indeed. I call it the Jekyll and Hyde syndrome.
Yeah. So, so the irony of that, I think is lost on a lot of people. And that to me is the golden rule being trampled on right under your own nose. So, again, I think a lot of businesses haven't really thought about these things terribly deeply. Again, I think you're right. Apple obviously trying to differentiate themselves in the marketplace, having expressed, a very strong opinion. And I think, again, bringing this back to the sort of logic and rationale why we in Cognizant will write a book about this and run the risk of being seen as heretical. Again, that's the logic. That's the answer, really, is that we want to be on the right side of this. We want to be seen as a company to be doing unto others as we would have done to us. We want to be on the right side of history here. And so the notions of responsible AI, of calling for data portability and ownership legislation, or algorithm audit legislation, again, I think they're all steps along this journey towards being able to use data in a responsible way to create the personalization that customers clearly want, but not to go further into that Zuboffian world of commercial surveillance capitalism.
Sure. And so we mentioned Apple as being obviously a very famous example of somebody that's going their own way, whether you like them or not. They've taken a very public and very specific stance on what they think about data and privacy and so on and so forth. But do you have any other examples of companies that you think actually they're doing it right? Because actually what we also find is that in business, that many entrepreneurs just don't wait. Many companies just don't wait. They figure things out and they decide to go their own way in the absence of other information or guidance. So have you spotted any examples you think they're interesting ones to watch?
Yes, and this is where it's difficult to talk about things mentioning individual companies, because you mentioned company A and then company B gets annoyed with you. So I'll talk about an industry.
Ever an analyst, Ben.
Yes, yes. No, I'll talk about an industry rather than an individual company. I think
Okay.
because I think there are lessons to be learned from the way that this industry has thought about this. Because I think, I made a comment a moment ago. Many companies haven't thought very deeply about this. I think a lot of insurance companies have thought quite deeply about this. If you think about insurance, it's in a way almost the kind of original big data based industry. It's all actuarial tables is all based on collecting data on a huge range of data points and trying to create predictive models out of that. So they have long had an interest in going after big data, deploying big algorithms against those huge data sets to try and increase their accuracy, the lower premiums, lower risk, increase profitability, et cetera, et cetera. Yet they haven't really operationalized a lot of this, and they haven't really put a lot of it into practice.
Right.
You might be surprised how little they're actually doing this in anger, in reality, if you like. And the reason has been because they have been very, very nervous and anxious about these, the absence of ethical frameworks, real legislative, regulatory ones, but also societal mores, if you like, around. So they've sort of held back. And we've been talking and working with many of the big insurance companies for many years, thinking about this and working with them. And they've sort of held back from operationalizing it because they want to go slowly to ensure that they don't sort of end up on the wrong side of this. And so I think that is a good example, to your point, Adrian, where, again, understandably, a sort of tech entrepreneur is always trying to push the edge, always trying to, it's like, I always think there's a metaphor here with like rugby. You're always trying to just push the ref, trying to get away with as much as you possibly can, and then you get caught, and you put your hands up and say sorry, ref, and so that sort of notion of playing right to the edge, again, is the essence of sort of entrepreneurial innovation. But here's an industry that could have done a lot more, and sometimes are accused of being kind of slow and backward looking and behind the times. But that's in a way because they've thought about, well, we don't want to surveil our customers. We don't want to be perceived as being creepy. We want to do this slowly and make sure that we're doing it within ethical and regulatory frameworks. And I think they're writ large as an industry, they're to be applauded for doing that.
Right. I think that's kind of fair. I mean, it's I guess it's instructive. People sometimes get caught up in the idea of thinking about what they should do, rather than actually starting from the point of like, what shouldn't we do? I mean, like back to your point of the golden rule is like, decide what you think is not acceptable, and that will give you a pretty good framework of and guidance around what you should be doing, rather than thinking about all these aspirational type of rules.
Well, again, the companies that sort of fall foul of that golden rule, in the sort of hypocrisy of you don't want to be tracked yourself, and you don't want your company data to be scraped and used by somebody else, but then you're going and doing it yourself. I mean, I think that's a pretty uncomfortable and unsustainable position to be in, frankly.
Absolutely. So, Ben, so we talked about the need for individuals to, if you like, to wake up and make the change, and I think that's already starting to happen. You mentioned ad blockers and so on and so forth, and that's all happening. But then you talk about governments making a shift, and then maybe setting up these, as you're calling for, the regulatory frameworks or regulatory bodies. I mean, well, what happens if we don't take action? I mean, and when is is there a tech apocalypse, kind of a dystopian future, and kind of what's the window of opportunity? What were you thinking about here? I mean, how bad is it going to get? I mean, you think about this and think about kind of the vectors that are within all this mix, and what does it look like? I mean, how quickly do we need to act?
I'm always wary of sort of falling into that black or white dichotomy between a sort of utopian and dystopian view. My perspective is, historically, what's the phrase? Life was nasty, brutish, and short. the Edmund Burke phrase. But yet people fell in love, had a good time, got drunk.
Yeah.
Think about the modern world. The modern world is full of awful news and awful things happening, and the pandemic, and people fall in love and get drunk and have a good time. So if the past has always been a mix of terrible things and good things, dystopia and utopia, the present is a mix of utopia and dystopia. Why is the future going to be either a dystopia or a utopia? That's my framework of thinking about it. So I think the notion of this sort of surveillance net that Brad Smith mentioned, the callback to Orwell, the work that Zuboff has done, I think is very real. And I think the timeline on that is probably shorter than people imagine. I mean, we're sort of in that world now. Mm-hmm. Now, does that end up in some sort of dystopian hellscape like Elysium or a Brave New World? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, those things are always works of fevered imagination. But I do think we're at a crucial crossroads in this whole story, and there is a very dark path potentially ahead of us if we fully go down this without putting in place some of these thoughts. I mean, just these simple thoughts. And again, you're quite right, Adrian, to call out the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle are coming together. I mean, the GDPR, the continuing steps that the European Union are taking, legislation in California. I mean, there's, and then on the technology side, there are the sort of solutions we touched on, and the other one I didn't mention, which is very significant, very important, is the work that the original father of the internet, not Al Gore, but Tim Berners-Lee, is doing with his new thing called Solid.
Yes.
People may have heard of that. Again, I think that's a very, very important development, that he shares a lot of these concerns. The internet, as he designed it, as he conceived of it, as he thought about it, hasn't really come out in the way that he imagined it would. And now he wants to try and take his beautiful duckling and turn it into prevent it from turning into an ugly swan. So I think all of these pressures, hopefully, and if you're an optimist, and ultimately I'm a rational optimist, a la Matt Ridley, I think you say, well, yeah, if enough people of goodwill, enough people who love technology, people like us, step up and say, we've got to grapple with these difficult issues and we've got to put in place the rules of the road, then hopefully, in 10 years, 20 years time, things will be okay. There's a famous phrase from an Italian philosopher of the 1930s, Antonio Gramsci, who said he was a pessimist of the intellect and optimist of the will.
Yes.
I always like that quote, and that's how I feel. You can be very pessimistic looking at all of this, and you can certainly, people who have read Orwell and Huxley and Dave Eggers, The Circle, that's a great book. People who've read these things and thought about these things, or just seen them in the movies, you can see a very bleak world ahead. But at the same time, maybe that world becomes bleak because people like us don't do anything about it.
Well, I think to that point, I mean, I wrote something a little while ago, and it was talking about, somebody asked me to write something about the future of customer experience, and I told a story, and then I concluded that the future of customer experience, or pretty much anything for that matter, is built in the present. And what I mean by that is that we can't sit around and wait for the future to happen. Actually, the future is dependent on what we do now and today. So the opportunity is now. It's not going to. The future is not going to. Doesn't accelerate sort of towards us. We sort of step into it, but actually we create it, but based on everything we do here and now.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Adrian. No, again, that's why I'm motivated and agitated, Paul, my co-author, and I, to write this, because that's exactly the sentiment we feel. Is it's up to us. It's up to people like us to make the world what we want it to be. And if we don't, then if you just sit back and don't participate in any way in this, then you've got no right to moan about it when it turns out in the way you didn't want it to.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. I mean, so is there anything else you'd like to highlight or add about that we've missed out about the book? Because I think we just had a bit of a general rummage around about what the book's about and things without kind of truly revealing sort of all the contents. Because obviously you want people to go and buy kind of cases of them, really.
It'd be great if people checked it out, and it's designed deliberately for our attention deficit disorder age, and it's you can read it in a couple of hours. That old famous line that if I'd had more time, I'd have written you a shorter letter.
Yeah.
We took 3 years to write this book, and it's 35,000 words, whereas Shoshana Zuboff's book is probably 200,000. So we've made it deliberately pithy and digestible, and it covers a lot of ground. It's really talking about the psychology of a lot of what we've discussed, the notion of algorithms being designed to kind of addict people to being online. It talks about geopolitical aspects of the world ahead of us. We have this phrase we use. There's the G7 countries are going to be replaced by the D7 countries, the digital 7 countries. And perhaps one of those countries is the Republic of Facebook.
Right.
So we talk about things like that, and then we talk about the fact that if you live in a zip code in a postcode full of code nowadays, this is probably the greatest time ever to be alive. But if you live in a postcode, a zip code, kind of back in the analog world, then it's sort of understandable why people want to put up a wall or cut themselves off from the continent. And so it ranges across a lot of different aspects. But yeah, it's as you mentioned, it has a manifesto element to it to really try and draw people's attention to it, to get people to participate in this. Couldn't be more important discussion that the world is having really at the moment.
Perfect. So, I mean, as I say, I liked it. I think it's colourful. It's got some great sort of graphics in there. It's very punchy and pithy. So, I thought it's a heavy message, kind of delivered in a very kind of like pointed sort of way, which is great. So, thank you for that.
No, thank you.
But so, a couple of questions just to wrap up, Ben. That I've been doing at the end of these interviews for some time now is I've been asking people a couple of, if you like, word association questions. I call it my longitudinal piece of social research around this concept called punk CX that I wrote a book about in 2019. And the first question I want to ask is, what one word or maybe one or two words would you use to describe a more punk approach to, say, customer experience?
Yeah. Well, being somebody of that vintage, I saw the Clash and the Jam and Elvis Costello and a lot of punk bands in 1977 and 1978. This appeals to me enormously, Adrian. I mean, I think the essence of that is the kind of authenticity of an energy, of a rawness, of an immediacy. They're the words that come to my mind. I saw in March 1978, I saw Elvis Costello and the Clash within about a month of each other. And, I don't think I've recovered now, 40 plus years later. And so that energy, that passion, that excitement, that youthfulness, that, as I say, authenticity, stripping away a lot of the kind of bells and whistles, getting back to basics. I think they're all elements that you're obviously talking about and thinking about in the way that you kind of frame your thoughts. And I'm there for you.
Perfect. And Ben, if I had to ask you to pick a company or brand that you think epitomizes that sort of ethos, what would you say?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, there's lots of, again, you sort of look towards smaller startups, companies that have got that kind of raw edge, that punk energy, rather than the kind of bigger, more established organizations. I mean, and there's many of them. I mean, a couple would come to mind immediately. People may know 37 Signals, the organization behind the whole Basecamp platform. They've had some challenges recently, some people-based challenges, but they to me have been an exemplar of this. I'm not sure they would use this language, but this kind of that back to basics, raw energy that you're talking about. So they would be one. Another one I like, and people again will know, Box, the storage company, Aaron Levy. I think I follow him on Twitter. I think he's one of the most brilliant observers, commentators, funniest, succinct, insightful. And he's got he might not choose to describe it in this way, but he's got a kind of a bit of a, punk energy, new wave energy in the way he thinks about things. And I think he thinks about things in terms of S curves and new waves, one wave replacing another. So they would be two I would call out that people could check out. I think they're both interesting companies led by interesting people.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Ben. Well, Ben, that's all I have today, for you today, that is. And just want to say, first of all, congratulations to yourself and Paul on the book. And thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your expertise with us today. That's been brilliant.
Oh, thank you, Adrian. It's been great being with you, and I really enjoyed the chat.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.